She walked into that room with proof and no mercy. If you missed part 1, find it on this channel. And if you are already here for the war, subscribe and stay close. Because Abeni is just getting started. Yiseok did not sit immediately. He drew out a second chair, placed it opposite her, then unfolded the screen on the wall and brought up the transfer records. He moved the account at 9:12 p.m., he said, but not alone. The system shows a second authorization. Abeni's jaw tightened. Sabine. Likely. What does likely mean? It means I do not speak before I can support it. That was irritating. It was also reasonable. He pointed to a line on the screen. Your husband used a legacy administrator pathway. Only someone with internal knowledge would know it existed. Abeni leaned in slightly. Not mine. Yes. She looked at the line again. Something in her chest settled into hard stillness. He had not simply stolen from her. He had taken the shape of her work and used it against her. The cruelty of it was almost elegant. Almost. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. So, they expected me to disappear. They still do. Abeni lifted her head. Good. Yiseok looked at her, and the silence between them changed. It was no longer empty. It felt like motion held just beneath the skin of the room. She asked, How do I get into that meeting? You walk in like you belong there. I do belong there. Yes, he said. A pause. That is the problem for them. Abeni held his gaze for 1 second longer than she meant to. Then she looked back at the screen. The next steps came quickly because she did not need a lecture. She needed a path, and then she would make the rest herself. Yiseok pulled apart the transfer chain for her, one document after another. The executive signatures, the revised client route, the access record from Sabine's account. Abeni checked each line twice, then again. Pain could not be allowed to become carelessness. When she looked up, she said, This is enough to corner him. It is enough to expose him. Abeni's eyes sharpened. Not corner? Yiseok met her gaze. Men like your husband do not stay cornered unless they believe there is no way out. Then I will make sure he has none. Something flickered across his face. Brief. Controlled. Approval. Abeni noticed. Of course she did. It made her look away first. The next few hours moved in clean. They clipped pieces. Yiseok sent the proof through a private legal channel. Not to the board, not to the press, not yet. Abeni insisted on that much. She wanted the first blow to land in the room where Jae-min believed he still stood above her. Not before. During the wait, one of Yiseok's assistants brought in a fresh blouse, dark trousers, and a coat tailored to fit her properly. Abeni changed in the private washroom. When she came out, she caught her reflection and almost did not recognize the woman staring back. She looked composed, not healed, composed. There was a difference. The clothes were plain, but they sat on her like purpose. Yiseok looked up when she returned. His eyes moved over her once, then stopped. No comment, no smile. Only that tiny pause, which somehow felt more intimate than either. Abeni adjusted the cuff of her blouse. What? He glanced back at the screen. Nothing. That is never nothing. A beat of silence. Then, you look more dangerous like that. Abeni narrowed her eyes. It should have sounded complimentary. From him, it sounded like a warning. She walked past him to the table. Good. The car arrived 20 minutes later. A plain black sedan waited at the entrance. Tinted windows, silent driver. No ornament, no polished display. Not the kind of vehicle that announced money. The kind that announced control. Abeni paused at the doorway and looked toward the room where her children slept. Yiseok followed her gaze. They will still be here when you return. The word return made her jaw tighten. Not if. When. She hated how sure he sounded. She turned to him. If I do not come back? His eyes stayed on hers. You will. It should have angered her. Instead, it steadied her. Abeni took one breath, then another. The rain had stopped, but the air outside still smelled of wet stone and electricity. The city looked washed clean in the dark, which only made the ugliness underneath it feel more honest. She got into the car. Yiseok did not follow. He only leaned in once and passed her an earpiece. Abeni looked at it. "What is this?" "Your link to me." She turned it over between her fingers. "And if I do not want to hear you?" His gaze met hers through the open door. "You will." The driver shut the door before she could answer. The car rolled away. Abeni sat with the folder on her lap, proof sealed beneath her fingers. The meeting place was not the company tower, and that alone told her enough. Jae-min had chosen one of the private conference floors in a luxury building downtown. Glass walls, low light, soft carpets, a room dressed up to make cruelty look expensive. Weak people loved rooms like that. Abeni recognized the type at once. The car stopped. The driver opened the door. She stepped out and looked up at the building. It gleamed like a blade. She went inside alone. The lobby was all marble and hushed voices. Security checked her name and let her pass with barely a glance, which told her Yiseok's influence was already moving somewhere out of sight. Good. She would need that. The elevator ride up was too quiet, too slow. Her pulse did not change. When the doors opened, she stepped into a private floor lined with glass, muted lighting, and a long conference room at the end. Now through the transparent wall, she saw movement inside. Jae-min at the head of the table, Sabine beside him, 3 board members across from them. Abeni knew those men. She knew the shape of their cowardice too well. They would not call it cowardice. They would call it practicality, neutrality, balance, anything that let them keep their seats. She stood outside the room for one breath. Then she opened the door. Every head turned. Jae-min looked up first. He did not smile. He looked irritated that she had arrived in one piece. That was almost worse. Sabine's face tightened the moment she saw her. The woman wore cream silk and perfect hair and lipstick that looked too careful to be real. She looked polished and hollow at the same time. Abeni took in the room in one glance and set the folder on the table without sitting. And Jae-min leaned back in his chair. "You came." Abeni did not move. "You invited me. I offered mercy." Her eyes slid to him. That was a mistake. One of the board members cleared his throat. Sabine looked at Jae-min, then at the folder on the table, and her fingers shifted once in her lap. Abeni noticed. Of course she did. Jae-min gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit." Abeni's answer came without pause. "No." The word landed hard, calmly, like a knife placed carefully on a table. Jae-min's jaw tightened. Abeni looked at the board members instead of him. "You all know me." No one answered. She continued anyway. "You know the numbers I built, the clients I kept, the deals I carried while half of you hid behind your titles and waited for someone else to do the difficult work." One of the men glanced down. "Good. You called this meeting because you think I am here to plead." Jae-min said nothing. "That is your second mistake." She opened the folder. Then she slid the top page across the table. Jae-min's eyes dropped to it. The transfer log stared back at him in black and white. For the first time, something in the room shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. Sabine leaned forward to read the page. Her face emptied. Abeni's gaze rested on her for a beat. "You should not read what you already helped steal." Sabine's lips parted. Jae-min cut in before she could speak. "This is nonsense." Abeni did not look at him. She reached into the folder and laid down the second sheet, then the third, then the access record, then the photograph, then the authorization trail. With every page, the air in the room thinned. No shouting, no panic, and only the slow collapse of certainty. Jae-min looked from page to page. His mouth tightened. The board members shifted in their seats. Sabine went pale. Abeni did not sit. She let the silence work for her. Then she said, "You used my own clearance to move a client portfolio I secured. You rerouted the records through a private account. You installed her beside you and called it Succession." Sabine flinched. Abeni turned toward her. "And you?" The woman lifted her chin, but there was fear in the movement. "You were trained by me," Abeni said, each word clean and deliberate. "You knew exactly what those files meant." Sabine swallowed. "I was told, do not insult me with fear." The woman went silent. Jae-min rose. There was the old habit, the need to stand when control slipped. A tiny performance of power, one as though height could replace authority. Abeni watched him without moving. "You should have left when I gave you the chance," he said. Abeni's face remained steady. "You mean when you threw me out?" His nostrils flared. She kept going. "You are trying to move my account under her name, and you thought I would come here empty-handed." Jae-min looked at the papers again. For the first time, something colder than irritation crossed his face. Not fear, calculation. Abeni saw it instantly. Good. He understood now that the room had changed. One of the board members spoke, voice careful. "Madam Abeni, are these documents verified?" She turned to him. "Would I waste my time with paper if they were not?" He lowered his eyes. Through the earpiece, Yiseok's voice came quiet and steady. "This left corner camera." Abeni's gaze shifted just enough. A tiny red light blinked above the glass. Recording. Internal. Hidden, but not enough. Yiseok's voice came again, calm as rain. "He is trying to keep this contained." Abeni answered without touching the earpiece. "Let him." Then she looked back at Jae-min. "You thought stripping my title would strip my leverage too." His expression hardened. Abeni tapped the folder once. "You were wrong." Sabine finally found her voice, thin, shaking. "Abeni, please." Abeni turned to her with such stillness that the woman shut up at once. The room went very quiet, not peaceful, waiting. Abeni did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I built those clients," she said. "I negotiated the terms. I repaired the accounts. I kept your company from collapsing more than once while you two played clever games in clean clothes and expensive rooms. Replacing my name does not erase my work." She looked at Jae-min. "It never did." Silence followed. Jae-min stared at her for a long moment, then slowly looked back at the folder. He was no longer reading the evidence. He was measuring the cost. That was when Abeni knew the meeting had already turned. Not because she had won everything, because he had started calculating how to survive her. One of the board members cleared his throat. "This is serious enough to require legal review." Abeni nodded once. "It is." Another man glanced at Jae-min, then away. Cowards always moved like that the first time the ceiling cracked. Jae-min spoke at last. You think this will save you?" Abeni's expression remained composed. "No." The answer seemed to unsettle him. She continued, "I think this will save my clients from your greed." That landed harder. Jae-min's jaw flexed. Abeni reached into the folder and drew out one final document. She set it on the table with care. A copy of their marriage certificate. The board members looked down. Sabine did too. Jae-min's gaze snapped to it. Abeni's voice remained level. "You refused to divorce me while stealing my work because you wanted my name attached to your company long enough to keep using it." A pause. Then, "That ends now." His face drained. For the first time since she had entered the room, he looked cornered, and because men like him only understood force when it was reflected back at them, he stepped forward. Why not to strike? To intimidate? Abeni did not move, his eyes fixed on hers, furious and low. "You will regret this." She looked back at him calmly. "No," she said. "You will." The room froze. No one breathed. Then the conference doors opened. A new man entered, tall, dark suit, no company badge. A security officer tried to stop him and failed, because the room recognized power before it recognized a face. The newcomer carried a slim leather folder. Abeni looked at him once and knew he had not come by accident. His gaze met hers, then shifted to Jae-min. A tiny, unreadable smile touched his mouth. When he spoke, the room changed all over again. "Now Yiseok requested I deliver this before you made a worse mistake." Jaemin's eyes narrowed. Abeni felt every nerve in her body still. Now the man crossed the room and placed the folder in front of her. She did not open it. Instead, she looked up. "What is this?" His gaze flicked toward the conference glass. "Your husband's hidden account trail," he said. Jae-min went completely rigid. Abeni's pulse sharpened. The man went on, his voice calm and even. And the sealed agreement that tied your clearance to his private transfer rights. Sabine made a small choking sound. Abeni's fingers hovered over the folder. What agreement? The newcomer looked at the earpiece in her ear, then back at her. He never told you? Cold slid through Abeni's blood. Yiseok's voice came through the earpiece a second later, lower than before. Abeni, he said, and for the first time that night, his calm carried strain. Do not open that folder in the room. She stared at it, and then at Jae-min, then at Sabine, then back at the folder. Her hand moved anyway. The moment her fingers touched the edge, the screen on the far wall lit up. A live feed. A room somewhere else. A legal seal. Her husband's signature. And beneath it, one line that made the air leave her lungs. Transfer authority granted through spousal claim. Abeni went very still. Not because she had lost. Because she finally understood. Why he had refused to divorce her. Why he had kept her close. Why the cruelty had needed to stay legal. Because if that document was real, then he had not only stolen her work, he had tied her identity to his control. The door behind her clicked shut. Locks engaged. Abeni did not turn. She could feel Jae-min smiling behind her. For the first time that day, he sounded certain. And Abeni realized too late that the meeting had never been meant for him to lose. It had been built for her to learn the shape of the cage. The room locked with a soft, mechanical click. It was almost gentle. That was what made it feel cruel. Abeni did not move. Neither did Jae-min. For one long stretch of silence, the only things alive in the conference room were the red blink of the recording light above the glass and the thin, controlled breathing of people trying very hard not to look afraid. Then Jae-min smiled. It was a small, ugly thing, the kind of smile that never touched the eyes. You should have known better, he said. Abeni kept her gaze on him. About what? That I would not bring you here without making sure you stayed. Sabine's fingers twitched against the table. She folded her hands quickly, like as if that could hide it. It did not. Abeni saw the tremor, the stiff shoulders, the way the younger woman no longer looked like a careful accomplice, but like someone realizing the floor beneath her had started to crack. Abeni turned her attention to the folder in front of her. The screen behind her still glowed with the words she had seen only seconds ago. Transfer authority granted through spousal claim. The room wanted a reaction. She gave none. Instead, she drew in one measured breath and said, You really believe this is enough? Jae-min's eyes sharpened. It is more than enough. Abeni looked at the line again, then back at him. No, it is a trick you thought would frighten me. His jaw tightened. She stepped closer to the table, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to make him feel the difference. Now, if this were enough, she said, voice low and level, you would not be smiling like that. That did it. The smile thinned. Jae-min hated being read. He could survive anger. He could survive tears. He could survive accusations thrown at him in front of witnesses. But being understood without permission always made him uneasy. Abeni knew that because she had once mistaken his unease for restraint. The man at the door, Yiseok's messenger, remained where he was, one hand resting loosely against his side, expression unreadable. He did not look impatient. He did not look concerned. He looked like someone waiting for a door to open on its own. Abeni ignored him. Her attention moved across the room. The board members, the glass wall, the red light, the shut door, the expensive carpet under polished shoes, every exit, every face, every possible crack. Then her earpiece crackled. Yiseok's voice came through, low and even. Do not touch the folder yet. Abeni kept her expression blank. You told me not to open it. I know. What changed? Nothing. I just needed him to think he had won before I took the ground from under him. Abeni's fingers curled once at her side. Of course he had been waiting for the room to settle into arrogance. She almost asked him what he had done, but the answer arrived before the question could leave her mouth. Every phone in the room lit up at once. The board members looked down first, then Sabine, then Jae-min. Abeni watched the shift move through the room one face at a time. Subject lines, attachments, her proof, The transfer logs, the account trail, the dinner photograph, the access records, via recorded audio file, and under all of it, one line that made the air in the room feel thinner. For immediate internal review. Jaemin's face changed. Not much. Just enough. He reached for his phone, then stopped when he saw the recipients. Board members. Legal compliance. 3 senior executives. 2 major clients. 1 external counsel office. Abeni's mouth parted slightly. He had not expected that. Yiseok's voice slipped through the earpiece again, calm as a blade sliding free. Your evidence is already moving. Abeni did not move, but her pulse lifted hard enough to make her throat tighten. Jaemin snapped his head toward her. What did you do? Abeni tilted her head. I sent my files to the people who should have seen them before you buried them. His face darkened. Sabine looked faint now, in the color draining from her face in plain sight. One of the board members had already half risen from his seat, phone in hand, reading too quickly to hide the panic creeping in. This is serious, he muttered. Abeni let the silence settle a beat before she spoke again. You thought a locked door would keep me in here long enough to humiliate me. Her gaze held Jaemin's. That was your mistake. His mouth flattened. You forged access. Abeni almost laughed. No, I reclaimed what was mine. The words landed hard. Jaemin stepped forward. The room seemed to tighten around that movement. You are still my wife. Abeni did not flinch. Her voice dropped instead, colder than before. Then maybe you should have acted like a husband. A sharp inhale cut through the room. Sabine flinched. One of the board members looked away. Jaemin's expression hardened into something mean and quick. He pointed at the screen behind her. This agreement gives me control over the transfer rights. It is legally binding. Abeni looked at him as though he had just confirmed something obvious. You say that like a man who has forgotten how law works. His eyes flashed. She continued, every word clean and deliberate. You used my name, my access, and my marriage to hide a transfer chain that should never have existed. You moved my work behind closed doors and expected me to stay quiet because you thought shame would keep me small. She took one step closer. Shame only works on people who are ashamed. Silence. Then the board member nearest the end of the table spoke, careful and uneasy. We should pause this until council reviews. Jaemin cut him off at once. No. The word came out too quickly, too sharp, too desperate. Abeni saw it instantly. He was losing control, not in theory. Now. She opened the folder, not because she needed permission, because she wanted him to feel the movement. The papers inside were arranged with surgical care. Yiseok had sorted them in a way that made the shape of the trap almost beautiful. Transfer chain, hidden account trail, internal email showing Sabine's access, a notarized document. Abeni's eyes narrowed when she reached the bottom. She read the page once, then again. Something very still settled over her face. Yiseok's voice came through the earpiece, quieter now. Read the last line. Abeni did, and understood. The trap was not in the document's existence. It was in the window. Jaemin's claim did not give him unlimited control. Might it only held if the marriage remained uncontested, and if legal counsel verified mutual consent within a fixed review period. The review period had passed. By 1 day. Abeni lifted her head slowly. Yiseok had known. Of course he had. Across from her, Jaemin still had no idea the ground had already dropped beneath his feet. Abeni raised the page and held it up between 2 fingers. You forgot the review period. Jaemin went still. She watched the shift move through him in stages. Confusion, then irritation, then the first spark of panic. No, he said, but the word had no force. Abeni turned the page and tapped the clause with 1 finger. Transfer authority expires without written reaffirmation from both parties. A pause, then quieter than before. And you never got mine. Sabine stared at Jaemin with open horror. Well, one of the board members muttered, Then the transfer is void. Jaemin whirled on him. It is not void. The man swallowed and looked back down at the document as if pressure alone might change its meaning. Another board member had already begun scrolling through the emails on his phone. His face was going paler by the second. Abeni felt the room tipping, not because anyone had shouted, because truth had walked in and taken a seat. She spoke before Jaemin could recover. You used the marriage as a leash. You used my work as bait. You used her, she said, glancing at Sabine with clear disgust. As a mask. Sabine's lips trembled. Abeni did not soften. And you thought that because I was thrown out into the rain, I would not know how to stand back up. Jaemin moved around the table in one sudden hard motion. Now the chair behind him scraped the floor. He was not reaching for her. Not yet. He was reaching for dominance. Abeni did not step back, not even half a pace. Yiseok's voice came through the earpiece immediately, flat, sharp. Do not let him touch you. Abeni kept her eyes on Jaemin. He stopped a few feet away. His breathing was harder now, the control he wore so carefully beginning to slip around the edges. You think the board will side with you? He hissed. Abeni glanced at the men seated around the table. None of them could meet her eyes for long. She answered anyway. They already have. It was not fully true. Not yet. But it did not need to be. Cowards moved quickly once consequence entered the room. One of the board members cleared his throat. If these documents are authentic, then we need to suspend all transfers and begin an internal audit immediately. Jaemin snapped toward him. You will do nothing until I say so. The man looked up then, and Abeni saw something new in his face. Not courage, relief. Because once a weaker man knows the stronger one is bleeding, he stops pretending loyalty is noble. I think, the board member said carefully, we should hear from counsel. Sabine stood so suddenly, her chair tipped backward and hit the floor. The sound cracked through the room. Her face had gone pale enough to show every fine vein at her temples. Her eyes flicked to Abeni, then to Jaemin, and for the first time she looked less like an accomplice and more like someone watching water rise around her ankles. I can explain, she said, and her voice was thin enough to tear. Abeni looked at her. There was no pity in her face, only disappointment, hard, clean, final. You can try, she said. Sabine swallowed. Her hands shook. Jaemin saw it. Sit down. The order came fast. Sabine did not move. That was enough. The room had already split. Abeni had not even needed to force it. Then Yiseok's voice returned through the earpiece. Check the last attachment. Abeni's focus sharpened. She turned another page. Tucked behind the transfer records was an unsigned internal confession. Her fingers stilled. She read the heading first. Statement of unauthorized access, pending verification. Yiseok had been collecting more than she knew. Her eyes moved down the first line, then the second, and then her body went very still. Sabine had already made a partial confession, not in the room, before the meeting, where someone had reached her early enough to pull fear out of her before courage could catch up. The statement was not signed yet, but the details were there. Repeated access, instructions from Jaemin, fake transfer routing, an attempt to hide the client movement beneath her account, and one final line made Abeni's stomach go cold. Directive included pressure regarding the children's schools and household access to force silence. Abeni lifted her head slowly. Every part of her face changed. Jaemin noticed. He saw it too late. You touched my children? Abeni asked. Her voice was soft. Too soft. Jaemin's jaw tightened. Do not make this about... Abeni moved before he could finish. She did not scream. She did not strike him. Yet she reached across the table and slammed her palm down on the confession statement so hard the paper cracked. The sound echoed through the room. Every head jerked up. Her eyes were bright and cold. This, she said, voice still low, is about my children. No one breathed. Abeni continued, each word sharper than the last. You changed their school. You cut their transport. You used them to frighten me into silence while you sold what I built to your mistress. Sabine made a small broken sound and covered her mouth. Abeni turned to her. And you let him. Sabine's eyes filled, but tears did nothing to soften the shape of what she had done. Jaemin's face tightened into fury again, but the edge of it had begun to fray. He reached for the folder. Abeni caught his wrist. The room went dead still. No, she was not stronger than him by size. She did not need to be. Her hand closed around his wrist with enough force to stop him. "You are done grabbing what you cannot keep," she said. His eyes widened with anger. For 1 second, he looked like he might actually fight her in front of the whole room. Then the door behind them opened. Not unlocked. Opened. The override panel gave a short beep. A new man stepped in, followed by 2 compliance officers. Jae-min went very still. Abeni recognized the first officer from the legal floor. The second carried a sealed notice envelope. No one spoke. The first officer looked from Jae-min to the table, then to Abeni. His voice was cool and formal. "We are here on behalf of the board." Jaemin's mouth tightened. The officer went on. "Yeah, your administrative privileges are suspended pending internal review. You are no longer authorized to direct transfers, restrict movement, or initiate personnel changes." The room did not erupt. That was the strange elegance of it. It simply emptied, like a chest finally exhaling after being held underwater too long. One of the board members let out a shaky breath. Sabine sank back into her chair as if her legs had stopped working. Jae-min's face had gone nearly white. Abeni looked at the envelope but did not reach for it. The officer set it on the table in front of her. Then he looked at her not with pity, but with respect. "Your counsel requested this be delivered immediately after confirmation of the transfer breach." Abeni's gaze lifted. "Counsel?" The officer nodded toward the door, and then Yiseok walked in. No, not rushed, not triumphant, just composed, in a dark coat, one hand in his pocket, the other empty, his face so calm it made the room feel suddenly underdressed for its own collapse. Jae-min stared at him with open hatred. Abeni did not move. Yiseok's gaze found hers first. Not the documents, not the board, not Jae-min. Her. He paused when he saw the bruise at her cheek, and something unreadable crossed his face before it disappeared. Abeni's voice came out quieter than she meant it to. "You knew this would happen." Yiseok answered just as quietly. "I knew he would try." He stepped beside her. Not in front, not shielding, not claiming, just beside her. That small difference landed harder than any speech could have. Jae-min looked from one to the other and seemed to realize something he had never allowed himself to imagine. "You planned this together," he said. Abeni's mouth curved without warmth. "No." Her eyes stayed on him. "You planned my fall. He planned your failure." The officer cleared his throat and handed the sealed envelope to her again. Abeni opened it. Her eyes dropped to the page. A formal order. The emergency board had voted to freeze all client transfers pending investigation, restore her access rights, and suspend Jae-min's authority over the portfolios she had personally secured. Her name sat on the page. Clear. Restored. Abeni's fingers tightened around the paper until the edge bent. She looked up. Jae-min's face had become a mask of disbelief. He was no longer standing in a room he controlled. When he was standing in the wreckage of one. Abeni turned the notice over once, then looked at the board members. "You all saw the proof. No one denied it." "Good," she said. "Then hear me clearly." The room went still. "I built those clients. I earned those accounts. I kept this company alive when your pride would have buried it." Her voice rose only a little, but it was enough to make the room hold its breath. "You took my labor, my reputation, and my peace. You used my children as pressure. You tried to turn my name into a collar." She fixed her eyes on Jae-min. "I am done wearing it." No one spoke. No one dared. Then Yiseok moved. He took the folder from the table, closed it, and handed it back to her with both hands. It was such a small gesture that it should have meant nothing. It did not. Abeni took it, and their fingers brushed for one brief second. The touch was nothing. It was also everything. Neither of them lingered long enough for the room to name what it had just seen, but something had already begun between them. Quiet, dangerous, alive under the ruins. Jae-min saw the movement and his expression sharpened with ugly understanding. Not just loss, replacement. He had not only been beaten in the boardroom, he had been outseen. That was the humiliation he could not swallow. Abeni turned toward the door. Jae-min's voice snapped after her. "You will regret walking away from this house." She stopped, then looked back over her shoulder. Her expression was calm enough to terrify him. "No," she said. "You will regret ever teaching me how to leave." She walked out. The room stayed silent behind her. Now Yiseok followed beside her. Neither spoke until the elevator doors closed. Only then did Abeni exhale. Once. Deep. Unsteady. The sound surprised her more than tears would have. Yiseok did not touch her. He stayed close enough to matter. "You did well," he said. Abeni looked at him. Still burning. Still tired. That sounded almost human. The faintest glance. "Do not spread that around." A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Brief. Strained. Real. It shifted something in the air between them. The elevator dropped in silence. When the doors opened, Abeni stepped into the lobby and saw the aftermath in fragments. Staff whispering, compliance officers moving, board members on their phones. The city beyond the glass still wet and dim and unaware that one room upstairs had just changed shape. Now Abeni kept walking. She did not feel victorious. Not exactly. She felt awake. Yiseok walked beside her through the lobby, and this time people moved out of their way without being asked. At the doors, she stopped. He stopped too. Her hand tightened around the folder. "They will fight back," she said. "Yes. They will lie. Yes. They may even try to take my children again." Yiseok's expression changed only slightly. "They will fail." The certainty in his voice settled in her chest like something solid. She turned to him. Under the dim light just beyond the glass doors, he looked almost unreal. Too calm, too composed, too dangerous to be standing this close to her and looking at her like she was not broken but becoming. Abeni studied him for one long second. Then she asked quietly, "Why are you helping me so much?" Yiseok did not answer at once. For once, the pause was not strategy. It was truth being chosen. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. "Because the first time I saw you," he said, "you were already standing straighter than the room deserved." Abeni's breath caught. He continued, eyes steady on hers. "And because men like your husband should never be allowed to mistake cruelty for victory." The words struck deeper than she expected. She had no answer ready. He did not ask for one. Instead, he opened the door and let the cold evening air spill around them both. Abeni stepped outside. The rain had stopped again. Somewhere behind her, the company was beginning to collapse in slow, controlled panic. Ahead of her, the road stretched dark and open. And beside her stood a man who had noticed her before she had ever fallen, who had helped without demanding gratitude, who looked at her like she was not broken, but becoming. Abeni tightened her grip on the folder and looked into the night. Her husband had lost the room. Her work was hers again. Her children were no longer trapped alone with him. But the war was not finished. Not by a long shot, because her phone lit up just as she was about to step into the car. Unknown number. No subject. Only 6 words. "Your children are not at home." Abeni went still. Yiseok saw the change in her face immediately. "What is it?" he asked. She looked up at him slowly, and for the first time that night, fear touched the edge of her fury. Not for herself, for them. And somewhere deep in the dark, beyond the city lights and the boardroom victory and the first real crack in her husband's empire, one last move had already begun. Abeni did not move for a full second. The message in her hand seemed to weigh more than the phone itself. "Your children are not at home." The words sat on the screen like a hand around her throat. Yiseok saw the change in her face at once. The calm in him vanished, not into panic, but into something sharper. Abeni. She looked at him, and for the first time that night, fear showed plainly enough to strip the color from her face. "They took them," she said. No cry, no shaking, no drama, just the truth, bare and hard. Yiseok's expression changed. Not surprise. Focus. "Who sent it?" "Unknown number." He took the phone from her, scanned the message once, and then turned toward the curb where the car waited under the glow of the streetlight. "Get in." Abeni did not hesitate. That was what frightened her most. Not that the message had reached her, that her body had already chosen movement before her mind had finished catching up. Yiseok was already speaking into his phone before she had even shut the car door. His voice stayed low, clipped, and controlled, the kind of voice that made other people move without asking why. Numbers, addresses, names. Within minutes, the city began to shift around them. Cars changed lanes. Engines started. Doors opened somewhere unseen. The search was already in motion. Abeni sat rigid in the back seat, both hands locked together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The road kept moving beneath them, but she barely saw it. When her mind ran ahead of the car, ahead of the streets, ahead of the dark, chasing shapes she refused to give names. Yiseok turned slightly beside her. Breathe. She shot him a look that could have cracked glass. Do not tell me to breathe. His gaze stayed on her, steady and unreadable. Then do not break before we find them. It was not comfort, it was permission. So she held herself together. The car cut through the city in hard silence. Streetlights flashed across the window, then vanished. Somewhere far behind them, the company she had fought for was still unraveling. Somewhere ahead, her children were waiting in the dark. She did not let herself imagine what waiting meant. The car left the main roads and drove farther out, toward a quieter edge of the city where the houses stood behind walls and trees and money. But when the driver slowed, Abeni already knew. One of Jae-min's hidden properties. A shell. A place built for storage, not living. Her stomach tightened before the car had even stopped. The gate opened. Abeni was out before the driver had fully killed the engine. Yiseok was beside her almost immediately, half a step behind, not leading, not blocking. Simply there. A presence with no wasted motion. The gate closed behind them with a dull, mechanical sound. Inside, the house was too quiet. No music, no television, no shouting. Just the soft hum of distant light and the kind of stillness that made a person listen harder than they wanted to. A guard stepped into view near the hallway. His body tensed at the sight of them, then shifted when he saw Yiseok. He moved aside without a word. Abeni did not thank him. Why, she followed the sound instead. Small, broken, almost swallowed by the walls. A child's cry. Her heart lurched once, violently. The door at the end of the corridor stood half open. Abeni pushed it wide. The room inside was dim, the curtains drawn. On the sofa sat her children, wrapped in blankets too large for their bodies, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. But they were there, breathing, whole. For 1 second, Abeni could not move. Then her daughter saw her. "Mom!" The sound tore through the room. Abeni crossed the space so fast the air seemed to break around her. Her son was on his feet before she reached them, and she caught both children at once, folding them into herself so hard it almost hurt. "I'm here," she kept saying, each word catching on something inside her. "I'm here. I've got you. Now I've got you." Her children clung to her like she might disappear again if they loosened their grip. She pressed one hand to the back of each head and held them until her breathing steadied. Yiseok remained at the door. He did not interrupt, did not offer reassurance that would have sounded too small for the room. He simply watched, his face set in a quiet severity that said he had already decided this would not be the last room made afraid by Jae-min. Abeni pulled back just enough to look at her children's faces. "Are you hurt?" Both shook their heads at once. Her daughter wiped her cheeks with a trembling sleeve. "They said we had to wait." Abeni's eyes sharpened. "Who said?" The girl lifted a small hand and pointed toward the hall. Abeni stood. The room changed with her. Yiseok moved with her immediately, not close enough to matter. They found Jae-min at the end of the corridor. He looked like a man who had not slept, not because he was tired, but because sleep would have meant surrender. His tie was loose. His shirt collar hung open at the throat. The sharpness in his face had turned brittle, like a blade left too long in the rain. He looked at Abeni first, then the children, then Yiseok. The muscle in his jaw jumped once. "You should not have brought him here," he said to Abeni. Her face did not change. "You should not have taken my children." His mouth flattened. "I was securing my position." Abeni let out a short breath that held no humor at all. "No, You are proving what kind of man you are." His gaze hardened. He took one step forward. Yiseok shifted by the slightest degree. Jae-min saw it. Of course he did. None the movement stopped him more effectively than a wall. His eyes moved back to Abeni. "You have already ruined enough." Abeni's laugh was brief and empty. "No, you did that yourself." He looked at her as though he still expected the old version of her to appear, the one who would explain, the one who would bend, the one who would soften the truth so he could keep his pride. That woman did not come. Abeni held his gaze and said, "You used my name, my labor, my children, and my marriage as if all of it belonged to you." Her voice stayed calm. That was what made it dangerous. "You had a choice at every turn," she said. "You chose humiliation. You chose theft. You chose cruelty. And now you will choose the consequence." Jaemin's mouth tightened. "You think this ends with you walking away?" Abeni stepped closer. "No," she said. "Nah, it ends with me taking back what you thought you could bury." For the first time, something flickered in his face. Not defeat, understanding, the kind that arrives too late to help. By dawn, the people who mattered had the evidence in their hands, the recordings, the transfer logs, the confession trail. The board moved quickly once the truth could no longer be hidden under polished language and executive charm. Jae-min's remaining authority was frozen. The client portfolio was restored. The hidden accounts were traced. The transfer authority was voided. Sabine broke first, not from courage, from the simple animal instinct to survive. What she said was enough. The rest of the paper trail did the rest. By the time the board finished its emergency review, Abeni's name was back where it belonged. Clean, restored, visible. Now Jae-min did not get the elegant fall he wanted. He got an audit. He got suspension. He got silence from people who had once nodded too eagerly in his presence. Men like him never fell gracefully. They fell in pieces. Abeni did not stay to watch all of it. She had children to hold, work to reclaim, a life to gather back from the floor. That happened in steps. She returned to her office. She sat at her own desk again. She met her clients face to face. She reopened the files that had been locked away from her. She corrected the damage. She spoke to the board on her terms, not his. Every time she chose instead of reacted, something in her body settled a little more firmly into place. Yiseok did not crowd her. He did not try to stand in the center of her storm. He appeared when needed, often with a document, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing at all except that same steady look that made her feel seen in a way she had not yet learned how to name. He respected the distance. That, more than anything, kept him close. Weeks later, long after the storm had passed through the company and left the rooms cleaner for its violence, Abeni stood alone in her office after the staff had gone home. The lights were low. The city glowed beyond the glass. The desk was hers again. She heard the door open and did not turn right away. "I thought you would have left already," she said. Yiseok's voice came from behind her. "And miss this?" That made her glance over her shoulder. He stepped in with his hands in his coat pockets, calm as ever. "This?" she asked. The part where you finally look like yourself again." Abeni turned fully to face him. The bruises had faded from her skin. The fear had not vanished entirely, but it no longer ruled her movements. Her children were asleep at home, safe. Her company was hers. Her name was hers. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You helped more than you needed to." Yiseok's eyes stayed on hers. "You say that like it is a complaint. It might be. It is not." Abeni folded her arms. "You knew too much too quickly. Yes, that should bother me. It probably does." He said it so evenly that she might have resented him if he had been wrong. He was not. And yet, standing there under the soft office light, Abeni felt something less comfortable than suspicion. Something warmer, not easy, not safe, and something that had survived pressure and silence and all the places she had nearly broken. She looked away first. Then she said, "You were interested the first time you saw me." Yiseok did not deny it. "No, he said. I was. Why? He studied her for a beat, as if considering whether the truth would cost too much. Then he gave it anyway. Because you were thrown into the rain and still looked like you were deciding how to win. Abeni's throat tightened. His gaze remained steady on hers. And because, he said quieter now, I do not respect people who mistake silence for weakness. The room went still. Abeni looked at him then, properly, without armor, without haste, without the need to survive the moment. For the first time, she let herself feel what had been building under the wreckage. It was not thunder. No, it was not rescue. It was steadier than that. Yiseok took one step closer, then stopped. He gave her the choice. That mattered. Abeni closed the distance herself. Not fast, not reckless, just enough. Their hands touched first, then held. Her fingers curled around his sleeve, and the contact grounded her in a way that felt almost startling. Not borrowed, chosen. Yiseok looked down at her hand, then back at her face. He did not smile much, but something in his expression eased, and it was more intimate than any grand gesture would have been. Abeni exhaled. Stay, she said. The word left her softer than she expected. Yiseok met her eyes. I am here. It was not a promise made lightly. That made it better. Months later, the company ran under Abeni's name with a strength it had never known before. Clients stayed. No new ones came. The board learned to listen. The people who had once watched her fall now stepped carefully around the woman who had climbed back up without asking anyone's permission. Her children laughed more. The house was warmer. The nights were quieter. And Yiseok remained, not as a shadow, but as a presence she no longer had to question. One evening, long after the city had settled into itself, Abeni stood beside him on the balcony outside her office and looked out over the lights below. You know, she said, I did not think I would survive the first week. Yiseok leaned lightly against the railing. You survived worse than a week. She turned her head. That sounds like a compliment. It is the closest thing I offer without being asked. Abeni smiled. Small. Real. Then she looked back at the city, and she had lost everything once. Not all at once, not cleanly, but enough to know the shape of ruin. And ruin had not won, because she had not broken where they expected. She had returned. She had reclaimed. She had chosen. When Yiseok's hand found hers in the dark, she held on, not because she needed saving, because she was finally ready to be loved without surrendering herself. Below them, the city kept moving with all its noise and appetite and lies. Above it, in the quiet between them, Abeni stood unshaken. She had taken every client she built. She had taken back her name. She had taken her life. And this time, nothing in the dark was trying to take her away. She did not just survive him. She outbuilt him, outmoved him, and walked away whole. If this story found you at the right time, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember what they are made of.